past 18 months have pressure tested companies and boards across every possible dimension. So Diana and Pat, from your vantage point on the boards you serve, what do you see as permanent effects that will alter national and global business models?
Well, it's a great question, Trina, and I'll start out and then let Pat add some more thoughts. The things I've observed are clearly all of us have noticed that there's a big trend. Many office workers can work from home, right? So I think the trend of remote work is here to stay, that workers are more going to demand that level of flexibility, at least for part of the work week, even if offices reopen as they are doing now. I think from a commercial standpoint, the boards I'm on, one is a retailer, brick and mortar retailer that needed to figure out ways to have contactless delivery and pivot to e-commerce much more rapidly than they otherwise might have. And reaching consumers in a way that's digital, I think are all the things that have been accelerated over the past 18 months for companies that maybe had a plan but weren't as far advanced as they wanted to be. They've had to find ways to creatively reach consumers and offer their employees a lot of flexibility. From a board perspective, the boards I'm on are already talking about not going back to a full year calendar of meeting in person, that finding a hybrid way to still conduct our business, a couple meetings in person and others virtual, because we've found out that it works, that we can be effective this way. One of the boards that I'm on, super creative, actually took us on a facility tour using a GoPro while we were all remote, because it was important for us to see the facility. We couldn't fly, and the people on the ground got a GoPro and walked us through the facility. It was fantastic and really efficient. So I think some of those creative ways we're finding to stay connected and get our business done are here to stay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Diana. Pat, what are your thoughts?
I would affirm several of the themes that Diana talked about. The first one, I was thinking of remote work. Remote work and customer facing. I sit on the board of what is Kentucky's largest bank. And we were pre-COVID, we were piloting interactive teller machines. A machine where, not the ATM, but a machine where you drive up and you see Gretchen or Diana or Pat on a screen and you talk to them and have a live, it's a Zoom in a box. I'm sure you've done it. It's now, over the last 12 months, it's now the predominant way we face our customer. It's been a complete, all the way around the horn, 360-degree turn on how we face our customer. So that and learning to pivot. You know, at Republic Bank, we did in the first half of last year. I mean, we're a consumer bank, home mortgage bank, a very typical larger community bank, but all of a sudden having to place $500 million worth of PPP loans and having to pivot and having to meet all kinds of customers' needs who at first blush were in economic distress, having to figure out how to navigate all the bureaucracies of the federal government and be nimble in doing that so that the customer got served and we delivered to them a brand new product. Everybody had heard of PPP loans, 12 months ago, pre-pandemic. So I think it's the issues of how you face the customer, the issues of remote working. The other thing I was thinking about, Assembly Healthcare, a company I sit on, until 12 months ago, our primary business was physically delivering ancillary, touch the customer, touch grandmother healthcare services in an assisted living. We were on a parallel track trying to develop a host of managed services, technology type services for long-term care companies. What was 80% of our business and 20% has now shifted the other way over the last 12 months. We accelerated the investment in technology. You couldn't go into nursing homes and assisted living communities for the first 7, 8, 10 months of this pandemic, depending on what jurisdiction you were in. So learning how to pivot, how to be nimble, how to continue to manage your workforce, and how to continue to meet your customer using a host of different ways, I think has required all of us to rethink business. And I think, like Diana said, a lot of those, we won't do all of them forever that way, but a lot of them will stay the course. There'll be a lot of remote work from now on in the workplace and lots of companies that we never thought of before.
Thank you. So building on that, Gretchen, what are the top forces that you think impact business in the coming year and perhaps even beyond?
Well, I would build a little bit on what Diana and Pat said, that, one of the, for this year, I think the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 are just really going to have to be dealt with by companies, and they're going to have to decide when or even if they bring people back to work. And if they're going to bring it back to work, because I think there's some situations that work very well remotely and you can continue to do that, or maybe even 1 or 2 days a week. But there are situations where I think it is not going to be good for the business to be totally remote all the time, or you maybe can't even perform the functions that way. So they're going to have to figure out ways to have their employees back and have them be safe, which means making some judgments about vaccinations. Are you going to require them with exceptions for medical or religious objections? How are you going to ensure that, people, if they won't be vaccinated, do you test them? There's just a lot of, I think, decisions to be made, that are, consuming companies now. But I do think that the remote work, companies have demonstrated that they can work effectively that way. And, particularly given the challenges that people with school-age children have been facing, I think companies are going to have to learn to be more flexible than they've been in the past with with their work rules, if you will. The second thing is, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but ESG is such a hot topic this year, and it will be for a long time to come. And I think that, the developments in this area are really fast moving, particularly on the climate change area. And the stakeholders that are interested in the subject are very impassioned about it. So you really can't afford to ignore it. And I think a lot of companies in, years gone by have had sustainability reports. That's for decades, companies have had sustainability reports. But I would say that it's really moved from, like something nice to have to something that you really have to have. And if you haven't, you need something with strategic substance, particularly on the climate side for certain companies. But for other companies, there may be other ESG areas that are more important. So if you look at the largest investors, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, together they own on average over 20% of the S&P 500, and they feel very strongly about ESG issues. And they've already started to vote against directors of companies that have not address the risks and opportunities of climate change or other ESG issues, depending on the company, to their satisfaction. And I think it's only going to get, more difficult next year. There's a lot of increased reporting that's going to be coming down the line. And as the reporting gets, there gets to be more reporting and it gets to be more consistent across companies, you're definitely going to see the major investors trying to measure peer-to-peer, and for the companies that fall short, they're either going to vote against them, they're not going to invest in them, or they're going to sell their shares. So I just think it's a very important topic that everybody needs to get educated about.
And are the dialogues of, that you're seeing at the board level, climate change, all the way to the importance of health, well-being, vaccinations, are those taking place on the boards at Johnson, at Teleflex? Are those dialogues ongoing today?
Yes, absolutely. And if boards aren't having those discussions at the board level, they should start right away.
Thank you, Gretchen. So, David, in your opinion, have boards used this period of disruption to leverage opportunities, to reset, to transform, at minimum to adapt?
I would say across the board, with respect to the boards on which I serve, the world has changed. The boards have been forced to up their game. It's forced directors to become more deeply involved and understand more about the intricacies of the operations of their companies and industries in which they work. Some of the things that have been referenced have been true across the board. How we convene, how frequently we convene, all of those things have changed. And I think in some ways, we're never going to go back to exactly the way we quote unquote used to do it. Will we find that things continue to evolve? I think yes. I think that it's already been mentioned by Diana that we'll likely see some type of a hybrid approach between in-person and remote. But I think that there's going to be a much greater appetite for virtual, not just in some of the board meetings, but that reference to virtual plant tour and other ways that we can basically take technology that probably was going to become relevant for us 10 years from now and pull it into our present. And I think that's been seen across the digital transformation across the board, that things that were on the radar to being deployed as a way of doing business are now in fact a way of doing business as a result of COVID. I think another thing that's changed that has less to do about technology and more to do about the level of execution that's required is that what we talk about and who is in the room, in the boardrooms, has changed pretty dramatically in the last 12 months. I don't think that's going to change either. I think the level of rigor and discipline that's now going to be expected, because we have been perhaps forced out of our comfort zone with the level of disruption and uncertainty that was navigated last year, that people probably are not going to let their guard down for quite a while. One thing I would add, though, is that there are centerpieces for the board that are going to remain the same. And I do believe that strategy, culture, CEO, succession planning, talent management, all of those things are going to stay as cornerstones of what are discussed and debated and hopefully weighed in on by the board in the boardrooms.
Thank you, David. Diana, just reflecting for a moment, when you think about the governance practices that exist on the current boards on which you serve, are there practices that perhaps are no longer applicable in the new environment? If so, what from your board view would need to change?
Well, I'm going to pick up on what David said a second ago. I think there are just some tried and true responsibilities of directors that I don't think will change. The ones that David mentioned: CEO succession, strategy, allocation of capital, M&A transactions, things like that, risk management, that'll stay the purview of the board and will stand the test of time. I also think that there's not going to be a shift in the standing committees that we see as corporate directors. There will always be, or in my view, there will always be an audit committee, a compensation and or talent committee, and a nominating and governance committee. What I do see, however, potentially, and this builds on something Gretchen said a moment ago, I see the potential for an ESG committee or some committee that is focused on this broad issue that is of such great importance to employees, investors, and our and potentially consumers, emerging as potentially becoming its own committee. I think how ESG topics are a thread through so many things that we as a board need to talk about: sustainability, how we think about our value chain, how we leave a footprint in the world, not to mention how do we measure and incent a management team in the right way with metrics that are relevant and move the needle from an ESG perspective, but are relevant for our business and driving value in whatever business we're in. So I think there are just many, many ways that emerging really important topic is going to come to the table. It's already in the boardroom, but I think it might actually elevate to being its own committee over time. No board I'm on right now is explicitly talking about that, forming a separate committee, but I could see it coming. It's certainly a topic in every boardroom I'm in.
Just picking up on Diana's thing for a minute, if I can, at Johnson Controls, they actually specifically made it the responsibility of the governance committee. So it's now governance and sustainability. So I think you're already starting to see, movement in that direction.
Interesting that it would go hand in hand. There you are, right? Pat, what practices, Diana used the phrase, I'll build on it. What practices would you say, in your experience, continue to work and really do have that durability standing the test of time?
I think it's the ones that David and Diana talked about. When I was preparing for this webinar today and thinking about my own experience on boards, going back to my law school experience, I mean, you're taught in corporate law, the fundamental rule of a board is setting the strategic direction, setting the culture, dealing with the CEO, and those kinds of things. And your role, and you're told over and over again that your role is not to meddle, not to become tactical, not to step into the day-to-day business. And I don't know what will last going out a decade, but clearly COVID has required, it's almost, I call it a core plus sort of notion about board engagement. I have found over the last year, we've been doing all kinds of things at the board level that nobody would have thought boards would have been doing, pre-COVID. The loan committee of the bank I sit on was a 6-time-a-year loan committee. This bank prides itself on a fairly strict and rigorous underwriting, but looking into this abyss of COVID, none of us really had any idea what was in store for the economy. And so we doubled the number of meetings. Our loan committee now meets once a month, which sounds like a fairly granular tactical role for a board member to be playing, but I find us engaged in those types of activities. On the University of Louisville Healthcare Board, which is a 5-hospital system in Louisville, we had a call this morning, compensation committee call, but we spent most of that call talking about macro systemic problems with healthcare and trying to figure out, really it was about nursing shortage. I mean, you cannot find nurses in the United States, or if you can, you're going to pay 30% more for a nurse than you were a year ago. So how to figure, I mean, those are typically management type decisions, but we had an 1.5-hour discussion on a compensation committee call this morning about the tools that our managers needed and what level of investment resources we were going to be making. So, the stuff that Diana was talking about, one of the bank board I sit on, we spent a long time on succession planning this year. It sort of forced us to think about that and to look at some of the issues on succession planning that we had not looked at pre-COVID. So we'll continue to do all that work. And I don't know when it'll go back to the old norm or if it will, but there's a whole bunch more work, I think, at an intensive level that directors are going to be required to do that they haven't done historically. It's not a club where you go spend an hour a quarter. And I haven't served on Fortune 100 boards, particularly. Most of mine have been closely held corporations or smaller startups or smaller to mid-sized publicly traded companies. But for all those companies, it's been a sea change and a real shift. Shift in your way of thinking, surely a shift in the way I was taught in law school 35, 40 years ago.